Good evening, and thank you for joining us. I am Reba Collin, the Associate Director of Sustainability Projects at NCBA. A couple of quick housekeeping items before we kick off this evening. As a participant, your line will be muted, but feel free to type in your questions in the question box on your screen. During the webinar and at the end of the presentations, we will get to as many of those as time will allow. If you have trouble with your technology, or if you are joining us for audio only, the webinar is being recorded and will be available for viewing in a few days at ncba.org. Just look for the Education and Resources tab on the website. The webinar tonight, titled Building Resilience, Contingency Planning for Grazing Management, will feature Chad Ellis and Robbie LeValley. A huge shout out to the USDA NRCS's Grazing Lands Conservation Initiative for making this webinar possible. Chad Ellis is the Chief Executive Officer for Texas Agricultural Land Trust. Mr. Ellis has over 25 years of experience working directly with producers and land managers implementing stewardship-focused management. Ellis not only promotes and advocates land stewardship principles, he also implements it with his own family operation in Leon, Texas. Mr. Ellis is passionate about helping empower the producer to better tomorrow than they are today. Ellis brings deep connections and experience as past chair of the U.S. Roundtable for Sustainable Beef and past chairman for National Grazing Lands Coalition. Robbie LeValley began her career in the livestock industry by growing up on her family ranch near Thermopolis, Wyoming. She began her lifelong relationship with Colorado State University College of Agricultural Sciences, obtaining her bachelor's and master's degree in animal science. After obtaining her degree, she earned the position as Colorado State University Tri-River Agriculture and Range Extension Agent for the Tri-River area. In addition to dedicating her career to agriculture extension, Robbie has been very active in the National Cattlemen's Beef Association, Colorado Cattlemen's Association, serving as president in 2010, Public Lands Council, Society for Range Management, serving as president in 2008, and Colorado Beef Council, and numerous other boards. Robbie continues to ranch in Western Colorado on a multi-generational LeValley Ranch, who was awarded the Sand County Foundation Leopold Ranch Award in 2023 and the NCBA Environmental Stewardship Regional Award for Region 5 in 2024. I'm going to let each of them take a deeper dive into the importance of evaluating the risk areas in grazing management. And Chad, I'll start off with you.
Thank you, Reba. Thank you again, Reba, and more importantly, I just want to, really thank you for all your work, not only for this webinar, but all you do for the rest of us cattlemen across the country. And I just can't sing your praises enough for all you do for us. And thank you. And it's a true honor to kind of share this discussion tonight with Robbie, and I really look forward to hearing, her thoughts and learning from her tonight as well. When we think about contingency planning, I think, really this is the most important component, in my opinion, when we think about the grazing plans and thinking through that aspect, right? When we think about our grazing plans, first we're, really thinking about setting our goals and our objectives as our operation and our business and what that looks like. Second, we're really documenting, our management task, like thinking, about our grazing rotation schedule or stocking rates. Our third component is really thinking about, our monitoring and evaluation, and really kind of looking at our plant health or soil health, and really is, starting to assess the effects, of our planning and our management, and kind of that circle kind of goes back again, right? It's back to our, resetting or rechanging or adjusting our stocking rates, et cetera. And it's just that feedback loop. But one of the key components that I've seen, many of us, and I'm guilty as well, is really kind of thinking through the contingency plan. And this is a crucial part, of our grazing management plan. One of the pieces, and we're going to kind of talk about, and I'm going to dive more into thinking about droughts, and that's always on the top of our mind. But I really want to stress too on everyone listening is that we need to think beyond just droughts, right? On our contingency plan, we need to be kind of, thinking about wildfires, floods. Like right now here in Texas, we're really stressed and thinking about disease outbreaks, right? Of the screwworm and things coming. We need to be thinking about a contingency plan today, and a non-stressed, situation, where we can kind of think through what we need to do and how that looks like, when a emergency happens. You may want to also think about from a freeze, right? My fellow friends in Florida, what happens, and have a contingency and plan if you end up having a freeze and into October, 1st of November, way earlier than normal, if you have a freeze, on that end. So when do you really start planning for a drought is the key question. I would say we start when it starts raining. And if it's not raining today is the day that we start planning for the next drought. It's going to happen. It's going to be there. But again, it's kind of thinking through this aspect in our contingency of a non-stressed and putting down our ideas and thoughts on this. When we think about it, it's really truly about identifying these events or these plans, these activities. We want to develop a plan in itself towards them. And we really want to define these trigger points and times we need to look at it. So our first thing when we think about, items to think about in the considerations of developing that contingency plan is really take that inventory of our livestock, our water resources, our forage reserves. We want to next is really set critical assessment dates and these actionable triggers when we hit certain dates and we haven't had, a forage and we know we're behind on that growing. We need to have these things and think through them of what are we going to do and what, that fits us in our operation to start looking at. And I'll kind of dive into some examples here in just a second. Our third thing we want to do is, use pastures with limited water. If we have, a pond or a tank, let's utilize those pastures. If that runs dry, we won't have that water resource and we won't be able to utilize that into maybe another pasture that has water troughs or pipelines and other water availability. The fourth thing you want to think about is really investigate nearby alternative grazing sources. So kind of assess of, what, does our neighbor have, maybe he's an absentee landowner and doesn't graze. Could we have those conversations ahead of time to be able to maybe utilize some of those other resources around us? The key to all of the grazing too is monitoring and monitoring, our forage, our moisture conditions, our growth, what's our recovery rate looking like? And lastly, if these target thresholds are met, we need to relocate those cattle, or we need to strategically, think about marketing and what that looks like and those triggers as we move forward. So what we want to do is, have this contingency plan, define dates. As you can kind of see here on the screen is we have, this is kind of for my region, is we have these key dates of April 1st here in Texas. I mean, we roughly have 25% of our growing season has happened by then, or 25% of the growth of our plants are by then. So it gives us this idea of kind of to assess those plants, the growth, start looking at, our weather, how much rain have we gotten, what does it look like in the forecast, And again, we can kind of have these other triggers that I have in here of June 15th is 55% roughly of our growth. July 15th is a very crucial major decision point for us here in our location. Is, at that point, roughly 67, 70% of our growth has happened. If we think about that, 70 to 75% of our total annual growth production has occurred by July 15th. So we need to think about, removal or changing our stocking rates or looking at these alternatives and have, these planned triggers. So, what are we going to do if this happens? And we place, as you can kind of see here, we write down our decisions and things that we may happen. If we get to this level, and we've all been to this level in our operation during a drought, it's just hard to kind of think clearly when we're just stressed trying to figure it out. It just really helps of having some of these ideas and decisions already down as we kind of start looking through our contingency plan. The last thing to think about is sort of this inventory, as we mentioned, I mentioned earlier, is having having our our inventory of our cattle, what we have, and the animal, the amount of forage that they're going to be taking, and looking at how much their forage demand and our animals that we have on our on our operation and in our grazing system, and start thinking about this destocking protocol. If we hit that trigger mark and we are 75, 80% growth, and we know we're not going to have any more growth, we need to make some decisions. It's either, we've got to bring in other forage or look for other forage. And if we don't have that, we need to start looking at the long game of, the more green we have on the pastures, more green in the back of our wallets. And we need to kind of start thinking through that. So again, we can kind of start placing this, these items in this spreadsheet to start kind of looking at strategies of our destocking, aspects. We want to maybe start with our weaned calves first, our yearlings, open replacement heifers, cows, with bad udders or eye problems, opens, non-uniformed cattle, maybe should be the first to go. And then start looking again at our older cattle, our bred heifers, and lastly, our mature cows, more of those late calvers first. And so having those kind of aspects in it, and then more importantly, being able to, prioritize and have sort of our inventory of our animals, as well as that forage demand of those animals. And we can start kind of looking at, our key target portions and ideas and thoughts in that contingency plan of those thresholds of starting to destock and getting to those key numbers. So these are key things that I can't stress enough, but more importantly, again, we need to be thinking about this contingency plan beyond just drought, but other, tragic curveballs that will be thrown to us, throughout the year. So with that, Reba, I'll hand it back over to you.
Robbie, I'll let you take over.
Okay, thanks so much, Reba. And gosh, Chad, that was great. Really set things up as we look at not only grazing, but just those, like you said, those curveballs. And really, I encourage all of those on the participants to take that to heart and write those notes down and literally have that down. I'm going to go over just a few notes that some will be repetitive of what you heard, but we'll make it so that we'll be able to answer some of those questions. LeValley Ranch is located in central west Colorado, so we have primarily the cool season grasses. So it's not going to apply to everywhere that everyone's on the webinar to begin with. But certainly when we think about grass production, we think about root mass and that, there will be very much those similarities. And so next slide, please, Reba. In our place, then, we primarily run a cow calf as well as taking that animal all the way to the finish, selling direct through a USDA packing plant. They're located close. Our son is on the ranch with us, as well as my husband's brother, and we work close with our family. That's noticed in the next slide. There's quite a few of us, and so we do have that ability to have the help when we need. They're not all located here, but they are helpful when we do need them. So the following slide, please. You know, we're all reluctant to say that this is what it does look like at times, because right now this isn't what it looks like. But we do remember that it can look like that as far as the green and the grass, but it is, just as Chad said, it is the time to be doing the planting when that grass is green. We normally do not get a significant amount of rainfall. We're in that 8 to 10 inch precip range, and most of that comes in the form of snow. So we don't normally get a ton of rain, but again, cool season grasses, then we're able to take advantage of those elevational differences, and that certainly helps. But again, just as Chad laid out, the time to plan is now, is when that grass is green, when we're thinking about the drought. If we look at the latest drought monitor on the next slide, then you'll see that awful looking red that is that central west Colorado, and that is what we're looking at day in and day out now. And we have not had significant rain for months now, and certainly we're looking at, you know, ponds that are not have any water in them, and fires that have taken over whole allotments and whole landscapes, as I know several on the call have as well. And so, you know, we look at that contingency, and thankfully in a lot of areas then this year, not, you know, other years it hasn't been this way, but thankfully there is a supply of hay. We are literally going to have to purchase 3/4 of our hay crop this year, just due to that there was not enough irrigation water, snow in the form of snow to raise any hay here locally. But again, unlike other years, then we're able to purchase that hay that it's not astronomical nor completely out of the price range or the economic availability. But again, this is when you are looking at those pinch points. Where is those ponds that have dried up? And that would be the answer if we look at the next slide, that we've not always had the ability to look at, but certainly this year, because of the significant lack of snow and the significant lack of any kind of rain, then we have taken inventory of every pond that has dried up and when did it dry up, and written that down in our grazing plan. Our grazing plan is in a 3-ring binder, and we add to it each year, and it includes not only our federal lands but our private leases. But this year we added those pinch points, and when did those ponds dry up? And again, we haven't had that, even though when we look at several areas across the nation, we know that we have been in a significant drier portion of the cycle since the beginning of 2000. We had a severe drought in 2002, and again in 2010 and 2012, 2018, 2022, and now again here in 2025. So again, we know we're in this continual drier period. If I look at some of the work out of NOAA, it does look like perhaps next year we'll move back into a wetter cycle similar to the 70s, but we just don't know. But again, that's the observation. that is so critical, whether it be for the planning or whether it be for just that memory to write that down so that you do have that contingency plan. It is that observation. And again, it is so critical to write it down. I cannot remember several things, but the minute I go back to the 3-ring binder to look and see, then it jars the memory, and I'm able to look at that and able to remember what we did and why we did that. But that contingency plan is critical from the past management as we look at not only adapting to whether it be drought or whether it be fire. Several of the individuals that we know around the country are facing that fire and having to move to whole other landscapes because of that fire. But it is that past management. If we think about a root mass, that root mass then turns over about 30% on these cool season grasses. And we need that root mass to turn over to expand the area and the volume and the capability of that root mass. Well, managing for that large root mass that needs to be larger than the top growth is one factor that we can build for that contingency plan, meaning that however we treat that plant coming into the drought will significantly not only determine what that plant responds to in the drought, but how fast that plant comes out of the drought. And we've seen that on the ground year after year, especially again as we've been in these drier periods. Those areas that have that grazing management plan, that pay attention to not taking a significant part of that plant and really managing the rotation, then literally come out of those drought areas more healthy than areas that have not paid attention to a grazing plan and not paid attention to the utilization and the long-term trend. So if I could stress one thing, not only do you plan when it's green, but you plan to continually have that ability to manage for that ability to grow or regrow while there is moisture so that you build that root mass, and that becomes your insurance policy. And just like the insurance that we purchase for not only the forage or the prices or just for health and fire, etc., that root mass is your insurance policy. And so think of that as your ability to have that contingency plan. And what do I need to do to build that root mass, whether it be warm season or cool season? And that's how you build that long-term sustainability, is that past management to handle these droughts, to handle the next insect population, to handle a fire. Again, it's written down with your grazing management plan, but it's got to have that flexibility for years like this, where you are literally looking at not being able to use whole landscapes because there is no water. When we add in the complexity of federal lands, and that certainly is a portion of our operation, is the ability to utilize grazing on the Bureau of Land Management lands as well as U.S. Forest Service lands, then we have to be always planning to have these water projects, to have these rotation projects, and make sure that we're utilizing the ever-ending process of NEPA. And that may be a foreign word to some, but that literally is the national process that both the agencies use for evaluating these different projects. Because it is a very complex project, it takes years. And so similar to our past management to concentrate on the root mass for our insurance, we have got to always be pushing the envelope with the federal agencies and the state agencies to make sure that the NEPA is moving forward so that we're ready for additional water, additional infrastructure, additional capacity when that next drought comes. And again, thinking about, when the drought and that, we do have the difference in the hydrological drought, the vegetation drought, all of those. And so that's where that power of observation comes in. We can have areas that don't have a significant amount of hydrological and are severe in the hydrological drought, but the vegetation is fine because the rains came in a timely manner. And that's where, again, that observation and writing it down and having those photos, similar to what we see if we move to the next picture, then become so critical, because you're going to have to explain whether you're on a federal allotment or a private lease or any of that is, you're in a drought and you're still out there grazing. Why are you doing that? And again, if we look at this picture, it's not, you don't see the indications of drought from a hydrological standpoint, but this is certainly one that we did have. There was not significant rain, but because we had very timely rains, and this was in 2020, we were able to have the appropriate amount of green. But that's not the case this year. When I look at this same picture this year, every plant is brown, with the blue grasses then certainly have dried out. We do not have the volume. We've had to move the cows through quicker. We did everything that Chad indicated as far as the process of culling those animals. The first ones we culled were a couple of them that, have disposition problems, and we were glad to see them go down the road. But then really started looking at those that were past the 90-day calving window, those that had smaller calves than they should have, as well as the udders and that. Our plan this year then is to early wean, and we'll bring them off not only the federal allotment, but the private, and early wean them and bring them home earlier than we would have. Again, not only to provide time for that mama cow to recover, but again, we're running out of water in a significant amount of the stock areas. So we've implemented everything that Chad said there. One difference that I just want to go over as far as a contingency is where you've got to really think through this. We've got a market that all of us know is unprecedented. And in 2010 and 2012, we went through significant drought just like this. And we culled down, it's really hard to really save that forage that we had to build that insurance policy. And then for our ranch, and it wasn't for everybody, but for our ranch, we had a tough time economically buying back in because we had the historical prices that we saw in 2014, 2015, and 2016. And so when we saw the drought coming again in 2020 and 2022, we made that very conscious decision to have another contingency plan, so we weren't relying on just reducing our stocking rate. And we searched long and hard for additional pasture that may be a lot further away than we would like, but it certainly provided us the ability to maintain that solid core of our cow herd to take advantage of those prices now and not be in another economic bind like we saw in 2014 and through 2016. So again, it's having that contingency and having that adaptive management. So again, these are cool season grasses. This is on some private ground that we have. Again, primarily the POAs, a lot of the needle and thread, and some of those in this high desert, cold desert with the sagebrush. Next slide, please, because the other thing you're going to have to really have the photos on is at times it really will look not what you are used to it being looked at, and have those pictures, because we do know that the cycle will return and we'll have that. But again, take the pictures, take the photos, and if we go to the next one, it clearly shows some of the range monitoring that we've done. These areas will come back. Again, this is areas that we've monitored for now since 1995, and been able to really hammer in not only the number of species, the height, but what is the long-term trend when we look at 1995 through now. Next slide, please. Again, long-term trend. Even with droughts, we have managed to increase the number of species, and it's because we've paid attention to that root mass, and because we've paid attention to utilization. But we don't hammer on utilization. Utilization is not an indication of long-term range trend. it is that ability to manage these landscapes for that ability to regrow. And while there is certain moisture, you've got to have these long-term photos. You've got to have the ability to look at them with that critical eye and with the science. If we look at the next slide, so that we have the continual long-term, you have the dates, you have the ability to have the specific locations. And then if we keep going through these slides, then you manage for that ability to measure how much the animals have taken, whether it be the wildlife or the livestock on the next slide. And so even after we've grazed these areas, you know, again, this is not this is our grazing stick that we laugh about because it does have the duct tape and that, but this is one that we continue to use because it's easy to pack it in the saddle, and we can do the quick measurements there and be able to document that we're still meeting the guidelines. This here particular pasture has a stubble height requirement for the Gunnison sage grouse. So again, having that quick and easy photo as well as our grazing stick allows for us to do that. Just quickly then, I know we're coming up on the time we need to go into the questions. I just want to quickly re-emphasize the ability, just as Chad mentioned, is that water, and you've always got to be managing for that water. This is just one tank, one allotment. We've got the tank that goes, we've got several tanks. We've got 17 tanks across 12 miles in the 22,000 acres for one of these areas. But if we look at the next slide, this area comes from a private spring that is on our private ground with the solar activity. But this takes years and years of planning, again, to get through the NEPA process and to get through just the physical of planning all this out. But that is always why you're always trying to improve the water structures across the landscape so that you have that contingency plan for not only drought, but just whether it be a freeze, and you don't want an animal consuming a toxin because a plant is froze or grew too fast, then you're able to move. So if we think about how all this is written out, I just want to give a shout out to the Grazing Management Planning Workbook that all of us have access to. That does a great job, just as Chad laid out, that really does force you to write things down. Again, ours is in a 3-ring binder that we keep a significant amount of data in, but it allows us to plan. It allows us to have that contingency. But we're always managing for the what ifs and moving them around. This year has been a struggle. We've had to move them way more than we've ever had to move them because we are so short of water. We've utilized the vents technology as well as several other parts of the technology, the ranch bot technology, monitoring all of our tanks, and so utilizing every tool we can, as well as a significant amount of time in the saddle, making sure those cattle have access to water, because of course that has a huge impact on their ability to graze and their ability to provide for additional weaning weight. And when I think about, you know, those long days and we've been choking dust down a lot, then the next picture reminds me that the time will come when it's green again and we'll have all the flowers back and there'll be snow in the mountains. So with that, Reba, I'll turn it back to you.
Thank you so much, Chad and Robbie, for sharing your valuable insights and taking the time to express the importance of evaluating risk in your grazing management operations. Just as a reminder, if you have questions, to type those into the question box and we'll get to as many as time allows. We do have a first question for Chad and Robbie. So Chad, you had presented that picture of the contingency plan that you guys have, and then also we have the grazing management workbook available on ncba.org on the education and resources tab. But is there other available contingency planning resources that you guys know of or would provide direction towards? Chad, if you want to go first.
Yes. Yeah, I mean, I think there's many, I mean, there's multiple, things out there. I think one of the most important things, resources, is what Robbie just shared. And I just want to thank you, Robbie, of sharing your story and your family's story. I think that's the most valuable thing at NCBA is visiting with our fellow, ranchers and grazers and producers across the country, and share the good, the bad, and the ugly, and how we got through these things. And I think that's kind of the number one resource. But a lot of your local extension, National Grazing Land Coalition has also some grazing management components. The U.S. Roundtable for Sustainable Beef has many areas that can help you maybe find those triggers and those dates in the forage that you have and the key growth curve in your area to kind of help you guide that those dates and those key actions.
Yeah, Chad's exactly right. There is several resources for those in the short grass. I know the work that Justin Durner has done up there in Cheyenne has years of data that literally do show those trigger points for that forage growth, and has not only just significant years behind that data, but different moisture regimes that each of those years have brought. So, for those in the short grass, that's a great resource. I know there's similar resources for the plain states and that, but there is research stations that have just kept volumes of data across numerous years that you can really take advantage of. Okay, if it's not April 15th for you, then what is that date? And utilize that information from those long-term research stations.
Awesome, thank you guys. The next question we have is, how often should we revisit contingency plans and update those and reconsider our risks? Robbie, if you want to go first.
Well, this year we have done it almost on a daily basis, and that's obviously not something that's normal, but literally with the lack of stock water and ponds that were great last week don't have anything this week. And so we're doing that daily this year. If we think about big picture, contingency, when we start talking about laying out water supply and water, then it certainly doesn't need to be every day, but it does need to be on a consistent basis. It's got to be consistent. These federal agencies, state agencies, even some individuals with the private leases, you've got to stay on them to keep the NEPA documentation going, the environmental assessments going, the making sure that you're in line for any of the EQIP funding. It takes consistency.
Yeah, I agree with you, Robbie. I think I think at the least amount, it needs to be at an annual basis, if not more often. I think Robbie has articulated very well at multiple times. Our grazing plan, our contingency plan within that, it's a communication tool, right? It's to those other agencies, to that other aspect, our other family members, our other coworkers, to we're all on the same page and kind of know that the step by step and what we're going to look at and what we're planning to do as these curveballs and pinch points happen, which we know it will. And so I think at least on an annual basis.
Awesome, thanks, Chad. That kind of leads into our next question of who should be involved when we're making these contingency plans and evaluating our risks. If you want to just take it off, Chad.
Yeah, I mean, I think from my end is, and every operation's different, right? And Robbie's dealing with, federal lands and there's going to be a lot more people involved with Robbie, and I'll let her kind of speak on that. I think it needs to be our key family members that are part of the operation, thinking through that, looking at those resources again, our local resources of our local NRCS or extension, or to kind of help us and think through that. And more importantly, I think our fellow just having those dialogues again. I can't stress that enough of the peer-to-peer interactions, and the more conversations we have kind of helps think through this. I mean, when we kind of sit down and think about it, a contingency plan is kind of a thinking process. And we can think of certain things, but like Robbie mentioned, things that I haven't really thought about, right? Or I haven't, it hasn't happened to me on our operation. That kind of was a light bulb moment on some things for me to think about. Oh, why haven't I thought about that? Or that would be a great tweak within our contingency plan. I think the more we talk about it, the more you'll be more confident in those decisions.
I think Chad laid it out well, and it's going to depend on what the particular area is, also as far as who is involved. If we're talking about the cattle, then that's one group of individuals within our family structure, and who's involved. If we're talking about the rangeland and that, then I've got to include U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service because we've got threatened species. I've got to include the Bureau of Land Management. If we're talking about our private leases, then on a couple of those, I certainly need to include the individual who actually owns that land. And then on some of the others, they've entrusted us to move forward with the best laid plan that we include them once a year in. So it is literally going to depend on the area of that. And certainly we're all in the area where if it's economic, then our banker needs to be part of that contingency plan as well.
Absolutely. Yep, absolutely.
Awesome. Question probably towards Robbie. What percentage of your contingency plan should be dedicated to soil improvement, given the importance of root mass?
That's a good question. I don't have it parsed out like that as far as a percentage. I concentrate on that root mass because that determines the width of the leaves. That determines that ability to capture the effective moisture that is there. That determines the height. We have a significant wild game population that comes through early and takes quite a bit of that forage. And so having that root mass that responds with the second tillers that come through then allows for the ability to manage with the wildlife. So I don't have it parsed out as far as a certain percentage, but I can tell you rangeland takes up the majority of what I concentrate on. And Mark and Ross and Hank and now Miriam, they work on the cattle part.
Chad, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I just think, like Robbie mentioned, the more you can focus on that and the more you can increase that, the more resiliency you're going to have, and helps you get through these droughts and other situations. So, yeah.
So our next question is about fire. Large fire events can be especially challenging. Do you guys have any contingency plan strategies for fire, or know of any from fellow producers?
Yeah, we had a fire on us this year, and luckily it did not grow significantly. Our local fire department jumped on that, and we've given them all the kudos in the world. But we have neighbors that have lost 60% of their allotment, and they've had to move to a vacant allotment. And it's a struggle. The cows don't know where the water is. As with any vacant allotment, no one has kept up the infrastructure, so the fences are in poor shape. But thankfully, the Forest Service and the permittees worked hard together, and there is those vacant allotments. Here in Colorado, the Colorado Public Lands Council, as well as the Colorado Cattlemen's Association, and I know other states have done the same, We have pushed hard on the Forest Service to identify those vacant allotments that are available when there is fire. And it's come to play out this year to be very helpful, because not every allotment is conducive to putting new cattle on. You know, some of the more prevalent vacant allotments were primarily sheep allotments. There is no way that we can put cattle on those allotments. It's just not going to work. And so we can't just say we have 27 vacant allotments and that's our grass bank. But again, it's the contingency plan. We've had it in place because of fire, because things happen. But we worked hard and pushed hard on the Forest Service to say which allotments are available, and it's paid off this year. It goes right back to contingency planning, consistency.
Yeah, I think, yeah, exactly right, Robbie. I mean, we've had fires, just, luckily, knock on wood, nothing, total destruction, but I've had very many close friends that have, lost everything from homes to barns, and, one particular friend has had it twice within, less than 10-year period. And some of his words, over, the tragic things that he's had to deal with, that I would add to think through is, add a job to everyone, right? On the, in the operation, if you can. One person can't handle everything and every activity, right? When we start thinking about losing a barn, losing a home, you've lost cattle, you have certain cattle, if you can kind of say, okay, well, you're in part of, handling of, additional pastures, additional hay coming in, you're in charge of, the local fire department in that contact. I think kind of helping try to think through of, whose role is going to be which, can help. Again, I think it's trying to think through anything and everything that will happen, and having it written down that you have thought through this, and hopefully it never happens, but you have it on paper, you sort of have that plan, because when it does happen, you're not going to be thinking clearly. And, just having it down, like Robbie's mentioned multiple times, will help you kind of get through this a little bit smoother. It's always going to be rough, but it will kind of help you on that. But I would definitely think about roles and responsibilities from the family and who's going to do what.
And I want to give a shout out. What I've witnessed for several of our friends and neighbors that have experienced this is there were producers from Oregon that have already reached out to our producers and said, let me help you from that mental standpoint.
Yeah.
And I cannot thank our NCBA family and our PLC family enough, because that's already done. And our producers have really, a couple of them sent some really pointed text and said, can't tell you how much that helped. And so I really want to give a shout out to everyone that was huge.
Yep. Very well said.
Definitely. Thank you, Robbie, for that shout out. Our next question is about biosecurity, especially with increased concerns about screwworm. Should that be considered in your contingency plans?
I absolutely do. And kind of, it comes back to the earlier question of how often should you look at the contingency plan and, evaluate and add and think through it, right? A year ago or 2 years ago, we may not have even thought of that, right? Of that being, something that would be a tragic change. And so I think, I would encourage everyone right now that you should think about, if that does happen, what are you going to do and how, and et cetera. So, and I would say even, beyond just the screwworm, but just thinking of other insect infestation of, you can be doing everything right and everything's looking good, and we have a grasshopper infestation, and the next day you have no forage and you didn't plan on that, so you just have to be ready for anything and everything.
Yeah, thanks. Robbie, we had a question about wolves and predator issues being in your contingency plans and how to kind of think through those aspects.
Oh, mercy. I know every state in the West is, and the Midwest, you think about those poor guys in the Midwest, everyone's dealing with this. And, New Mexico and California and certainly Oregon and of course here in Colorado, we're just starting, but it's just horrendous. And, I can't tell you that our place we've thought about it, we've discussed it. We don't have a solid plan yet. And so, we're still in that, what do we do? We know the initial what do we do, but we're, we've not, we don't have anything written down. And we don't have, we don't have it written down, unless somebody from Kansas that really wants to adopt us.
Awesome.
I know
Thanks.
that's not a solid answer. We've
But I
thought a
think
lot about it. We just don't have anything.
But I think that's the first step, right? And again, it's a communication tool, and you guys are talking to amongst yourselves as family. If you may not have it down written and made that final decision, but you're further along.
Definitely. Thank you, Chad. We have time for one final question. So, do you guys think there are economic benefits of having a contingency plan? And is there some ways to be financially successful with your contingency plans?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, we already bought the hay. And, before it does go even higher, because we already had that trigger point written down and had thought about all of this, even in April when things weren't looking as good as they should. So it just pays off in a big way. And just the culling decisions, we've got those cattle already identified that are going to go. Just the early weaning already purchased where they're going to go. All of that takes the pressure off the what ifs and so it's not only an economic advantage, but it's you approach these decisions not in the emotion. You approach these decisions because you've thought them out and those triggers are written down.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you're going to be, not saying you're not going to fall into the red, but you're going to be less in the red's not going to hurt as bad because it is going to be an economic return. The worst thing, and we see many people fall into it, is even also the aspect of I'm going to sell a few head and then I'll use that money to buy some hay, and then the drought goes on and they've ate up that hay, and then it's like, okay, we'll sell the next few more, and it's kind of Robbie mentioned, at the end of it they ate up all their capital. And and so thinking through this contingency of how you're going to work through this, you're going to be more economical, stable on the back end in the long game. And I appreciate Robbie's comments in her presentation, thinking through those additional pastures and thinking through that of it may not be selling, it may be retaining, but it's already kind of looking and having an idea where those potential additional pastures that you can move those cattle and make that decision like she did and the family did, that it may be further than you would like, but that's a better economic decision for the operation.
No, that's some great insights into that. I want to again thank you, Chad and Robbie, for your time this evening, and for everyone joining us online. Also, a thank you to USDA NRCS Grazing Lands Conservation Initiative for making this webinar possible. Again, the recording will be available in a couple of days at ncba.org under the Education and Resources tab. Thank you again for joining us, and have a great evening.
Thanks, Reba.
Thank you, Reba.